Hi, I'm Carrie from Crafts for Wellbeing, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a floral nightlight. The equipment you'll need are an old jam jar, some pencils or Posca pens or something to colour in with. I'll talk a bit more about those later. Masking tape, some tracing paper, a pair of scissors, some white acrylic paint, double-sided tape, and some marker pens, so that could be Posca or a fine liner pen, and a sponge, and then of course you're going to need an LED candle as well. So for this section we're going to just need the jam jar, your masking tape, your sponge and your white acrylic paint. Start off first of all by masking around the top of the jar, just so that we don't get any paint on this bit where the lid screws on. And once that's done we can start putting the paint onto the jam jar. So you'll see here that I wasn't able to get all of the sticky off of the label of the jam jar beforehand, but that doesn't matter because we're going to be covering it with the paint anyway. So I've put a little bit of white acrylic paint into a pot. I've taken just an old sponge and I've just put a little bit onto the sponge, and I'm just going to, with a dabbing motion, put a layer of that paint all around the jar. So I don't want to put any in the bottom, so I'll come down to about here, but I can come up right to the top where the masking tape is. It wants to be quite light, you don't want to be brushing it down like this, you just want to be dabbing so that you get that texture. And also so that it doesn't create a thick layer, you still want the light to come through. The reason why we put the white on is because it diffuses the light and it gives a really nice effect. So just dab it on all the way around. See, that's a little bit too thick there, so I'm just going to keep dabbing with the cleaner end of my sponge to see if I can take a little bit off, blend it into the areas around. There we go, and that's looking better. So I'm going to continue that and just go all the way around the jar, and then we'll start with the next process. I've added paint all the way around the jar, so I'm going to set that to one side and let that dry. The lid is up to you, so you can either leave it as it is. This one's got the date printed on it, so I'm going to go over it, and I don't really like the orange colour, so I'm just going to add a little bit of blue. This is phthalo turquoise actually to my acrylic paint, so it doesn't have to be this kind of paint, you can add any colour that you like. I would add the white though, and if you're going to be colouring over the top of your lid, because it just makes it a bit more opaque and so any writing won't show through. So I'm just going to add this tiny little drop because a little goes a long way, and then I'm going to mix that in. And now I'm going to use my sponge just to sponge over the top of that, and I might as well take it off the spatula here. So you can see the addition of that white paint is just adding some really good coverage, so it can actually cover all of the orange and the text as well. So I'll go around the sides. So I'll finish that off and then I'll put that to one side to dry as well. Now we come to creating our flowers or decorations for the jam jar. Obviously they don't have to be flowers, it can be any decoration you like. I've done this with lots of different people. We've had all kinds of different things. We've had butterflies, we've had dogs, we've had leaves, so just do whatever you like really. The one tip I would give you is that when you're measuring out your tracing paper, just to make sure that you measure it out to the height of your jam jar first before you start drawing, just so you know that whatever you draw is going to fit onto your jam jar. And then if you'd like some templates to work from, I'll put the details of where you can download these from me below the video. And then we're just going to trace around them. my tip is to trace with a dark colour around the outside. So I'm going to use a Posca pen, but you could use a fine liner pen. So I've got some Faber Castell ones here, or any other fine liner pen that you've got. But as I say, I'm going to use the Posca pens. And the reason why I'm doing this fine lining around the outside is because it actually gives the design definition. When the candle glows through it, it just gives a little bit more definition to what you've drawn. So I'm just going to go all the way around. Obviously take your time. There's one drawn out. I've measured it against my jar, and if I want to put them all down separately, I'm going to get about 4 around the jar. But you could overlap them, so you don't have to put them all down individually. You could overlap them so you get like a kind of stained glass effect. So I'm going to put 4 along this strip of tracing paper, and I'll show you in a moment when it comes to gluing why it might be a good idea just to keep everything on one strip of tracing paper, as it makes it a lot easier when we come to gluing a bit later. So I'm going to do 4 of these, just outline those, and then we'll come back to the colouring in a moment. All my flowers are drawn onto the tracing paper now, and we're ready to colour in. A little tip about colouring in and what materials to use. If you have too much of a wet medium on tracing paper, it does tend to curl up. So I would recommend using either something like pencils. Posca pens are actually okay, they don't put too much wetness into the tracing paper. If you've got alcohol markers, they'll be absolutely great as well. So anything like that that's just on the drier side. So I wouldn't use watercolour paints or anything like that, so just stick to something like these options that I've got here for you. And then just colour in, so you can go as wild as you like. I'm just going to have a quick play with some pink and blue for this one. Once that layers on, I might add a darker blue around the tips. So just have a play, colour to your heart's content, and then once you've coloured in your flowers, I'll show you some tips for gluing your flowers onto the jar. I've coloured all my flowers in and they're ready to get stuck onto the jar now. So again, I would just say, as you can see, even with the Posca pens, that water in there has just made them curl up a little bit. So if you're using a glue, a wet glue like a PVA glue or Mod Podge, then just know that when you glue the back of your flowers, they're actually going to curl up, and they'll probably curl up kind of like that. So just as you're gluing, if you're using a wet glue, I would cut your flowers out individually first, and so as you're gluing, just make sure that when you're gluing, you just keep your finger on top of your flower, and then it won't roll up when you're gluing it. So the best thing would either to be use a dry glue like a glue stick. Again, if you're using a glue stick, cut your flowers out first before you put the glue on. But I like to use double-sided sticky tape, and what I do is actually keep everything on the tracing paper first, put layers of double-sided sticky tape down, so just put several layers down, one next to the other, and then in that way you can cut them all out with the backing still on, obviously, and then once they're all cut out, then you can take the backing off and apply them to your jar. So that's what I'm going to do now. That's all the flowers stuck on, and then an optional extra is to either add some string or some ribbon around the top. The lids don't tend to come down that far, so you have a little bit of area to put your string or your ribbon on, which is great. You could even glue some around the base if you wanted to as well. I'm just going to put a little bit of string around the top here. And that's the jar completed. So that's your nightlight jar made. Please remember to only use a battery powered LED light in the jar and not a real candle. I hope that you'll enjoy making this, and if you do, please do share your photos with me, as I'd love to see them. I'll put the details in the description below. Thanks a lot for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.